Even if you're not growing food within 100 feet of a roadway, this is still something that every gardener, homesteader, past, present, and future need to know about and inform their gardening friends of, especially those that have young children. If you grow food near a roadway, my goal here is to inform you about the lead that may be in your garden so that you can have your soil tested to see what levels of lead may be in the soil and how you can go about reducing the amount of lead that your family may be exposed to and ingesting. For a very long time, leaded fuel was used to power vehicles of all kinds. That would be cars, trucks, farm vehicles, aircraft. And it wasn't until New Year's Day of 1996 that this stuff was banned from use in new vehicles. And this still excludes farm vehicles and aircraft and so forth. This has caused a lot of lead pollution, especially near roadways, busy freeways, urban areas. But don't let that fool you, because rural areas, they're not exactly safe from lead pollution either. How does this affect your garden, your health, your children? Well, you could be inhaling and eating lead. In some places, those levels can be quite high. Let's talk about lead accumulation in edible gardens real quick. There are 3 ways in which your edible garden could become contaminated with lead. Number 1, dust accumulation. So whenever vehicles pass by, that dust that's kicked up can settle on the leaves of your vegetables. So think of your spinach, your lettuces, your greens. Secondly, there's bioaccumulation. Now, you may be familiar with sunflowers and lead being used as a way to bring lead out of the soil and reduce concentrations. We're going to talk about that more in a little while, but bioaccumulation is another way. And third is the binding of lead in root vegetables. Think about how whenever you go to rinse your root vegetables, how there's little bits of sand and dirt. That same idea, except with lead. Dust accumulation is largely caused by vehicles. This is why heavily trafficked areas can cause a lot of issues with lead. Not only were they highly trafficked in the past, so there was a lot of lead deposited, but they're also frequently traveled now, so they kick up a lot of dust and dirt that contains lead. However, it can also be caused by the wind, especially coupled with dry conditions, exposed soil, loose soil. This will accumulate on the leaves, the flowers, and the fruits. For smooth fruits like peppers and tomatoes that are easily washed, or for those veggies that aren't exposed to the elements such as corn, which is inside of a husk, or beans that are being shelled, those are actually protected from the dust. Both these categories, they could be washed easily. They're just protected better from the dust accumulation versus things like if you're eating edible flowers or if you're eating, say, curled greens like kale. Those could be harder to remove the lead from if dust has settled on them. Bioaccumulators actually uptake lead from the soil and then store it in the different parts of the plant. And there's still mixed information out there. For a long time, it was said to have been a great way to remove lead from the soil, but opinions seem mixed. However, those plants that are known to be bioaccumulators, such as sunflowers, those may be a very risky crop to grow, especially if you have lead in your soil, because even if it may not be an excellent solution to pulling lead out of the soil, they could still be accumulating more lead than the normal garden veggie might. And now the binding of lead within root veggies. Root vegetables are just dirty when you pull them out of the dirt. They grow in the dirt, they form ridges, sometimes they split off and grow in different directions, like my carrots sometimes do here in the clay soil. And when these veggies come out with these ridges, they have dirt, rocks, you name it, just kind of tucked into the little ridges and crevices. And the biggest issue here is that the lead can actually become embedded around the edges of the root vegetable. Peeling is a great way to protect your family from potential lead contamination in your root vegetables. So you can see why the root vegetable is a little more tricky. I need to do more research, but I'm beginning to think that our root vegetables are some of the most problematic ones whenever it comes to toxic heavy metals being ingested from the garden. Again, I need to do more research, but it's really beginning to look that way, especially after some of the food recalls and the studies that I've seen. I believe I said recall. I didn't mean recall. It was a study. I believe there were recalls afterwards. We've definitely seen recalls on baby food for heavy metals, but what I'm referring to was a study that was very popular. We'll get back to that in a little bit. In any case, the lead contaminates not only the surface of the soil, but also below the surface. So you had the lead accumulating on the top, but with each passing season, with each new vehicle that passed by, the lead was accumulating with the leaves and the grass clippings, the dirt, just layering like it normally does anywhere else. So over the years, you have layers of dirt that have lead contamination. So whenever you really think about it, those layers where lead has been locked into them, you may be growing your root vegetables down off in that. Normally, if you were to just grow something, say kale or tomatoes, they may not take up that lead, so they may be a little healthier, contain less lead, because they can't bind to it down off in the soil the way the root veggies can. So while they may have less, the root veggies may have more because the lead can actually bind to them. Now again, that would be in a situation where you're further away from the road, less dust. It's also really important to remember that this level of contamination, it is not restricted to roadways and urban areas. This also applies to very rural areas as well, because you have to remember that these recalls, these studies based on the baby food, a lot of that food is grown in large commercial farm environments, and many of these places are quite isolated. And this tells you that there's clearly a source of lead that has been deposited there. Now, if we circle back to what caused the pollution, we do know that obviously farm equipment is being used to plow these fields, plant these crops, harvest these crops. So if the field has been in use for many, many years, decades even, then there could have been accumulation of lead in that field just from the machinery that is working it. In addition, some of these fields may be located near busy interstates, because there are interstates that go through cropland, even in isolated areas. So even in a rural location, you can still be a victim of lead pollution. You may live way on out in the country like we do, you still have that risk. It is still a great idea to keep this in the back of your mind, to avoid planting food out by the roadside and to try to plant food as far away from the road as you can. That'll help you a lot in trying to remove yourself from the lead contamination. The most vulnerable population whenever it comes to lead is young children under the age of 6. This is especially true of children that are crawling and still putting things in their mouth, because it's easier for them to ingest the lead because they're down on the ground, they're grabbing things, putting them in their mouth, they're crawling across the ground. It's just far easier for them to accumulate lead in their little bodies. There are recommended levels of lead in different environments, say urban areas, busy freeways, less busy freeways. They actually have levels of lead that they recommend that the levels stay beneath. And while that seems to provide a little bit of comfort, the issue with children is there is not a safe amount of lead for them to be exposed to. The level is 0. And that's what's really concerning. And in no way am I trying to scare anybody. It's just one of those things that affects most of us. Most of us are going to be dealing with lead pollution at some point in our lives. And children are so incredibly prone to learning and behavioral problems from lead exposure. Even when exposed to the smallest amount of lead. There are a lot of different health problems that it can cause, but I'm not here to really dive into that. I'm gonna let you guys go ahead and go down that rabbit hole on your own, and I will post some links for you if you want to look at anything or do your own research. You know, I'll give you guys some links. But I just feel like this is so important to warn other parents about, because I have 2 little children, and I know many of you guys have children as well, and this is just something important to know about. Just something that, you know, a new young gardener may know nothing about, may not even know that there's lead in the soil. I mean, that was 1996. We have a lot of adults that were born after 1996 when they banned lead gasoline. So I feel like it's just important to mention. It's just good to make people aware of these things. So what can we do about the lead that is in our gardens that could be making our family sick? While topsoil can be removed and replaced with clean, fresh topsoil at a hefty price, it'll only solve the issue for so long, especially in an urban environment or by a very busy highway. More dust will settle in over time, so it'll just add additional lead to the soil. It just wouldn't be very economical to excavate all your soil unless there's incredibly high levels of lead in it. Another cheaper way to deal with this is to amend the soil. Phosphates are being used to try to change the chemical makeup of the lead. Phosphates can be added to convert the lead in the soil into pyromorphite. I may be saying that wrong, but I'm gonna put the name down here for you to read. This makes the lead highly insoluble and lowers bioavailability. So that's kind of a next best situation whenever you're dealing with a lot of lead contamination. For the sake of keeping this video a little bit shorter, again, I'm gonna let you guys dive down that rabbit hole into the phosphates and how it can help with lead contamination in your soil. I'll post some more links about that down below as well. So what else can you do? Raised beds. Raised beds are excellent to help with this situation, especially if you get some of the ones that are on little legs, so it keeps them up above the soil instead of, you know, within a few inches of the ground. Because if you keep the beds a little higher, it's gonna be harder for dust to get into the bed. You're gonna want your beds as far from the road as you can get them. Just move your beds as far back as you can, and you're gonna want as many buffer zones as possible. You want to put as much as you can between that road and your garden. So let's think of it like this. If you have the road here and your home here, definitely put your garden back here. You may have a fence in front of or behind your house. That's one buffer zone. The house is another. Any trees you have, that's another buffer. You know, bushes, or even leaving just strips of unmowed grass. That would be an excellent way to capture some of the dust that is coming from the road. And not only are those strips of grass great for catching dust and other pollution from the road, like trash that gets thrown from vehicles, it'll help keep it out of your yard a little more. But these zones are actually great for the wildlife. They are excellent for sheltering creatures like lightning bugs. They're great for allowing weeds to grow, and I use that term loosely because a weed is just a plant growing where you don't want it to grow. Technically, all of these native weeds, you know, our pollinators need them. There are so many species of beneficial insects that rely on those weeds. So leaving that unmowed strip, it, again, buffer zone, you know, you're saving the lightning bugs, you're saving the pollinators, the native species, is just a great idea. It really is. I'm such a fan of that. But I'm going to jump off that train and go back to the lead issue now. So low spots on the property where any runoff from the roadways could kind of go down, settle, and drain. Those low spots may be holding quite a bit more lead than surrounding high ground. So try to keep your garden out of those spots where it may puddle, and try to watch where the water runs from. If it runs off the roadway, watch and see what direction it goes in, especially during torrential rainfall, because that one's really gonna matter. Now, everybody's gardening situation is vastly different from the next. Some people are on a really tight budget, others have quite a large budget. But this is what I do in a perfect situation. First, I would test multiple points throughout the property to evaluate where the lead is most concentrated at, where the worst collections of it are. And you're really going to want to focus on the spots that you're considering using for a garden, or if you find out that your current garden is actually quite high in lead levels, you may want to test different spots where you may like to put your garden at. That way you can find the best point on your property to grow. After you do this and you find out the lead levels in your soil, you could kind of make like a map of your property showing yourself where these higher levels of contamination are, where the lesser levels of contamination are. I would then move my garden as far from the road as I possibly could, at least 150 feet. My garden's actually in a really prime spot on the property. Any runoff from the roadway goes around it, not through it. It's also probably 250, 300 feet from the road. In addition, I don't know that there were many houses on our road before the ban, so I know that our levels will be a little lower. In addition, I do know that our current location was most likely a cattle pasture, especially with what's all around us. So not only was it likely a cattle pasture, our road didn't have much traffic, still doesn't have much traffic. There was not many buildings on this road whenever it was banned. And again, my garden is several hundred feet from the road and any runoff goes around it. I wasn't even familiar with the concept of significant lead pollution up until a few years ago. It wasn't even a thought that crossed my mind. I mean, I was only a child when they put this into effect. So of course, people of my generation and younger likely have either no idea or they don't think anything of it. So I'm quite lucky that it just so happens that we are in an area that would have significantly less lead pollution than the standard home, than the standard American family. There are so many people who live in urban environments that are dealing with much higher levels of lead. At some point in the future, I'm hoping sometime in the winter, I would like to do soil tests myself and see what's going on throughout the property. So that's all for today's video. I just really wanted to take an opportunity to educate some of my viewers on lead pollution, contamination, and how serious it really may be for different viewers, especially those in urban locations or by very busy highways. And while lead paint was of concern, I feel like the lead that may be coming out of the soil and being ingested via certain crops such as beets, carrots, I feel like that could be worse, but that's just an opinion. I don't really know. This would be a great thing to research on your own. I would like to do more research myself about it. But again, I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys have learned something today. Maybe I've helped somebody to, think about, hey, I might need to move my garden, or I may need to rethink where I'm planning to place my garden. And if I'm helping somebody, that's all that matters to me. I just wanted to make you guys aware so that you all know what you're eating from your own garden, because obviously when we grow our own food, we are just trying to do what we can to feed our family healthy food that we know where it came from. It was lovingly tended. It was grown with intent, just nutritious, healthy food. Again, I'm not here to scare anyone. I just wanted to make you guys aware of this situation. But thank you guys so much for dropping in, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, guys.